Okay, so what we're going to look at is Vietnam and talk about how the U.S., I know it says 50, but it's actually after the war that we get involved. And our whole goal in the midst of the Cold War was to stop the spread of communism. We've talked about this with Truman, with containment, and this is going to dovetail into this area. And we basically fear after containment that if we contain it, but it allows other areas to get it, that it could be like the domino theory, that other areas will fall to it. And we know that Indochina is very important for the rubber, for the oils in this area. So at the end of World War I, the U.S. will get involved in Vietnam because the French are trying to regain control of Indochina, which we know as Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. We're also going to see that Ho Chi Minh writes a letter to Truman saying, hey, we want our freedom. Please help us. Who does the U.S. side with?
France.
France. Why do we owe the French? A long time ago, American Revolution. We owe them our independence. And so the U.S. will aid France and establish their attempt to reestablish control. And Truman does not aid Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh will go get aid elsewhere. And what will occur is the U.S. just sends money, but the French lose at Dien Bien Phu. And this will lead to the Geneva Conference, where we're going to be involved. And we're going to get involved, and this is going to lead to what we know as the division of Vietnam right here at the 17th parallel, a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, and eventually free elections to occur. Do free elections occur? No. Even when I went to Korea, we divided it. We're supposed to have free elections. Did they occur? Even in Germany, we divided it where free elections are supposed to occur. Did it occur? No, it's a repetitive trend. And so when we look at who the U.S. will eventually be fighting against, we have to look at Vietnam, and I'm going to draw a very bad Vietnam over here. So I know Vietnam is divided at what parallel? 17th, and this is a DMZ, no military weapons. So the Viet Minh, Ho Chi Minh is going to take control of North Vietnam, and his people who support him are called the Viet Minh, not Viet Cong. Let me get to the Viet Cong and where they're located. And the Viet Minh, their whole goal is to unite all of Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh. But huh?
He looks like Colonel Sanders.
Okay, so we divided here. South Vietnam is going to fall to the U.S. in the Geneva Accords. And we are going to put up a guy. His name is Ngo Dien Diem. Was Ngo Dien Diem the ideal person to put in South Vietnam? No, because was he an agrarian person? He was a businessman. Was he Buddhist? No, he was Catholic. And so because of the policies that Ngo Dien Diem will endorse, a group of people in South Vietnam will form called the Viet Cong. This group is who the U.S. is fighting. So it's going to be the U.S. versus the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. So if you've ever seen Forrest Gump, he's going to call the Viet Cong, or he's going to call him Charlie. Charlie is the nickname for them. So the U.S. in South Vietnam, we will be fighting the Viet Cong, and the Viet Cong is fighting the U.S. because we have anti-communist policies here, that we don't want them to unite with North Vietnam, and we have a pro-Western government that is beneficial to business, but most of South Vietnam, is it a business sector? No. It's an agrarian sector, and we're going to see Diem is going to take away land from the peasants. So who are the peasants going to turn to, the U.S. or the Viet Cong? The Viet Cong. The U.S. is going to start burning pagodas. Is that going to upset the Vietnamese people? And eventually in protest, a lot of the Buddhist monks will set themselves on fire. Y'all have seen those images before, right? And now you understand why they're doing it. It's because of the U.S. stance. If we get to the video, you'll see it. So because of the unpopularity of U.S. policies backed by the Diem Regiment, the elections to unite Vietnam will never occur. So we're going to see Eisenhower and Kennedy are going to send in the Green Berets to provide aid to Ngo Dien Diem Because again, his policies, are they benefiting the Vietnamese people? We are also going to see that they realize the Viet Cong, again, this is people of South Vietnam that are against the U.S. policies, are attacking our soldiers, which it's, how can we send soldiers into a war if we're not at war, right? So again, this is eventually what we're going to talk about is the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. So we're seeing that they're fighting the Viet Cong, and the Viet Cong want to unite with the Viet Minh under Ho Chi Minh's rule. But we know Diem, and this is the Buddhist monk I was telling you about. We know Diem's policies are highly unpopular. We are seeing he attacks the Buddhists by tearing their pagodas down. And so for the Buddhist monks to be able to get any television time, they have to take extreme measures for people to understand what's going on in Vietnam. So this is why they set themselves on fire. We're also going to see they move villagers. We're going to move villagers off land so that they can nationalize areas for the government to control. And by moving those peasants are going to start joining the Viet Cong. Diem's policies are going to be very corrupt and favoring foreign investment. And the U.S. realized that we put the wrong man in control. Is he even Buddhist? No. Is he even an agrarian farmer? No. And so the CIA is going to try to plan a coup. But actually he's assassinated prior to that. And we say it's not our operation, but there was. And then we see JFK is assassinated. So LBJ will take over. And this is when the Gulf of Tonkin incident happens. Y'all know of this incident that apparently in the Gulf of Tonkin there was the USS Maddox, right? It's on its merry way, just on maneuvers. And a North Vietnamese patrol boat attacks. Does it hit the boat? No. But all of a sudden this is reported to Congress, right? And we know in history when our boats are attacked, what do? Go to war. And so we see that this is going to lead to the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And it's a blank check that allows him to escalate the war. But is it a formal declaratory war? No, there is no war, but who are we really fighting in Vietnam? The Viet Cong. And we're trying to reestablish U.S. control of this area, but as the U.S. policies carry on, what is going to happen to the size of the Viet Cong? It's going to grow. And we will see that we start launching airstrikes on North Vietnam. And this is going to be called Operation Rolling Thunder. And if you've ever heard, you know John McCain, right? John McCain was involved in Operation Rolling Thunder. And what happens to his plane? It's shot down and he's taken as a prisoner of war. And y'all know John McCain, he kind of walked like this, right? Because his collarbone was broken when he was taken as a prisoner of war. Because they knew his dad was a general. And so what they did to him is they tied his arms behind his back. And a lot of times prisoners of war, they put a 2x4 behind their back so they could flip him on their front side and then walk on the 2x4. And so his collarbone was broken, and this is why he walks kind of like this. And so we're going to see a lot of other soldiers will be taken as prisoners of war in North Vietnam, and they will be kept at their camps. The most famous was the Hilton Hanoi. So here are our troops in Vietnam, just some images. Okay, this is the other problem. As they go through Vietnam, and we'll watch Forrest Gump at the end of the year, we're going to see that their biggest problem was that the Viet Cong lived in the tunnels. And so if you ever watch Forrest Gump, he's always jumping into a hole, and he's like, we had to put TNT in there. The reason why is they're trying to get through these headquarters. And so this is why the attacks always happen, because it's a guerrilla-style warfare. So just the intricacies of the tunnels. Here's the rest of the tunnels. So the way the Viet Cong were able to get weapons was actually, they could not go through that DMZ, right? So Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh, they would send weapons through Laos and Cambodia. Is that going to take time? And so we're going to see that eventually a lot of our Viet Cong are going to be on the agrarian side of Laos and Cambodia. And eventually the Viet Cong will spread to our main cities where the U.S. has its military bases. And this is important, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Because when the war eventually escalates and we realize we want to get the weapons away from them, where do we start bombing? Cambodia and Laos. So the Viet Cong tactics, we know they use tunnels. We also know that they use guerrilla warfare. We also know that they move freely within the cities. It's not a typical war where we see people in uniform and we know that they're the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong live within the civilian people. We also see that they have trained children that are helping as well. And we're seeing that they use the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And so this is why the U.S. is going to develop some policies that we're going to start to go in and kill any man of fighting age, which you should have seen in your reading called the Malay Massacre. When the people would not turn in any of the men, they took the women and the children, they put them in the pit, and they killed them. So we're going to see the U.S. is going to use other tactics in the guerrilla warfare. One of them is the napalm gas, which is just gasoline to take out the jungle terrain. The other one is Agent Orange, and again, that will be used on the ground. Both of these chemicals and the soldiers that were near them is going to lead to disease, okay? And we'll see a lot of our veterans having to suffer the types of cancer they get from this. The other thing I had talked about is we did not know who the Viet Cong were because they did not wear formal uniforms. So the U.S. would go on search and destroy missions where we would go into villages and we would ask for the men of fighting age who are part of the Viet Cong, and would the people tell them? No, and so they would basically just destroy, and this is what we know as the Malay Massacre. So this is just in the palm tack. I know this image is very graphic, but this was the #1 image by Time magazine that they put on their, you know how every year Time comes out with like, who are the people, the #1 person of the year? This was it. And what has happened here is that they've dropped the napalm gas, and people are running out of the jungle, tearing off their clothing, because what is on their clothing? Napalm. And so people are like, why are there naked children? But you have to understand what they're dropping on. And now most of us have seen in World War I and World War II, these images were never brought into our homes. But Vietnam is actually the first true living room war where there are journalists out there capturing these images and bringing us home. And so how are people going to feel about the war? They're for it or against it? Against it, and it's because it's a living room war. And just some other images. Okay. These are search and destroy images. This is another image that was done by Time, where they're asking this guy that they think he's Viet Cong to tell us where the others are, and he doesn't tell what's going to happen. When we get to the video, you'll see this image and then the shooting of it. So I'm sorry, it'll be very graphic, the video we watched today. All right, so just more search and destroy missions. So we know there was a lot of songs against the war, but you have to understand the draft to understand why there's so much protest against the war. The draft is going to say, and we've seen exemptions before, the draft is going to say, just leave it right there because I'm videotaping, okay? The draft is going to say that men that are aged 18 through 26 have to register for military service unless you're going to college. Who gets to go to college?
Rich kids.
Rich kids? Smart people? Do you have to be smart to go to college? No. No, we could go to the 13th grade at Navarro, right? Okay. Who gets to college? We're talking about color now.
White people.
We do have some historically black colleges, but is there a lot?
No.
So all of a sudden, this war is going to have who enrolled?
What?
Minorities. Because, and now, is the civil rights movement going to take off a little bit more? Saying that the Vietnam War has unproportionately chosen children of color to go to the war because they cannot get into what? College. Wait, but the government's going to come around saying, no, 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 we've already settled those cases. But is there going to be some systematic bias? Yes. And so this is why the civil rights movement is going to move to violence, because MLK and Malcolm X and all these other people are saying, no, you've got to realize that our men, and this is the first time that we will see African Americans on the front lines with guns. There are more African Americans in proportion to their population represented in Vietnam. So now can you understand why the civil rights movement moves to violence? We're also going to see the burden of the war is on the lower class, because y'all said rich people, right, can go to college. And then we talked about the 13th grade, but we're going to see a higher proportion of people in college. Okay, and so this is why the anti-war movement takes off, because people start to look at the systematic bias. And I know, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Is going to become the mantra, because LBJ will escalate the war, and many people are going to blame it on him. But has this war been escalating prior to him? Yes. And you just got this sheet, right? Can y'all see the amount of troops coming in? We see prior to Kennedy, we had 900. And then Kennedy comes in, and they keep on going. We have about 16,000 under Kennedy. Then LBJ comes in, and look at how much our soldiers go up. It goes from 23,000 to the end of his administration at 465,000 soldiers there. So do you understand why they blame him? And many people are like, LBJ is a bad president. But we had just done Great Society, when we're looking at all those programs. We're like, wow, he's done civil rights. He's done a war on poverty. He's brought education. But it is the war in Vietnam that will taint his presidency. So, the Tet Offensive. And Tet is the Vietnamese name for New Year. What do most people do on New Year's? Party. And so they have a truce. What they're going to do is this DMZ, they're going to open it up so that people can bury their dead. They're going to bury their dead, right? But this is going to lead to a surprise attack, because the weapons used to have to go through Laos and Cambodia and the Ho Chi Minh Trail, right? And so they open up the border. People are burying their dead. They're going to put in the coffins weapons. And this is going to lead to a surprise attack. And this, many Americans were like, whoa, this was supposed to be a truce. So does the war look winnable anymore? No. And because of Tet and the protests that will happen, LBJ will announce that he will not run. LBJ says this war is winnable, but what we see from Tet doesn't look winnable. This establishes a credibility gap, that our government says one thing and we see other things on the TV. So the Tet Offensive, 68 is a tumultuous year, because it starts off with Tet, where it tells us we're not winning well. MLK will be assassinated, Bobby Kennedy will be assassinated, and then we get to the Democratic National Convention. And the Democratic Party is synonymous with two things. One, civil rights, but continuing on the Vietnam War. And so people are going to protest, and Mayor Daley takes out the police, and there will be open conflict between the Vietnam protesters and the police. So just the assassinations and then the protests. So Richard Nixon wins in 68, and what he's promising is an end to the Vietnam War by Vietnamization, handing over the war to the Vietnamese people. Okay, we know Nixon doesn't win in a specific place. Where does he not win? In the South. And this eventually, you saw on your study guide, was a Southern strategy. We'll talk about next week, where he'll try to win this area. So Nixon comes in and he implements a policy called Vietnamization, where we are doing the most unpopular thing of the war, is pulling our troops out. So if you see on Nixon's administration on this chart, what happens to the amount of troops we have in? It goes down, because he's pulling out our troops, and he's saying we will fund the war for the people who are fighting against the Viet Cong. But what has happened to the number of people who are part of the Viet Cong? It's gone up. And so what will happen is he says we will win the Vietnam War with peace but with honor. And we will move away our soldiers, and the Nixon Doctrine will come out, basically saying that we defend our commitments, but we're not going to commit our soldiers anymore. And so people begin to like Nixon, right? Our soldiers are coming home. But do you think our soldiers are going to be respected when they come home?
No.
This is one of the groups of soldiers that is not respected. World War I veterans are respected, World War II veterans are respected, but our Vietnam veterans are not. And Nixon had promised we're ending the most unpopular thing of the war. And many people felt that they were ending the war. But actually what Nixon is going to do is he's going to invade Cambodia and Laos. Because what was coming in through Cambodia and Laos? The weapons. And so this is what's going to lead to people protesting. And one happens at Kent State. And they go to the building they feel that represents the military, which is the ROTC building. And they're protesting and they're setting it on fire, and the National Guard is sent out. The National Guard is sent out and they kill 4 people. Are people up in arms about our government and their commitments in Vietnam and the deception? And so by the 70s, we're going to see, because of our soldiers' commitment to the war, the 26th Amendment, which is the last amendment, will bring down the voting age to 18 years old. We're going to see the draft will move to a lottery system. What that means, the lottery basically means is they have everybody's birthday in a giant bowl, and they pull out December 14th. Everybody born on that day, 18 to 26, is going to war. Well, how can you get out? College, medical exemption, or if you have what? So this is why Fortunate Son comes out in relation to the lottery, right? The Pentagon Papers will eventually come out that will reveal that was the Gulf of Tonkin incident real? No. And Nixon's going to get upset about this, and he's going to try to sue and prevent its publication. But can the press publish this? Because of what amendment? First Amendment. And we're going to see that it gets published, the people get disenchanted that we have been deceived into Vietnam, and so the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution will be repealed, and Congress will limit Nixon's power with a new act called the War Powers Act. And the War Powers Act says that he has to go to Congress. He must go to Congress when sending troops into a conflict. He only has 60 days that he could send them. After 60 days, can he have those troops there? What does this do? Expand the presidential power or decline the presidential power? Decline. So by 1973, Nixon is out. We agreed to a ceasefire as long as they return our POWs. We will withdraw our troops. Whoa, what is that the U.S. saying? Drawing our troops.
It's a retreat.
We are retreating, and are we going to lose in Vietnam? And so this last image is us rescuing our embassy workers out of there and American sympathizers in Vietnam, because who is taking over Vietnam? The Viet Cong with the assistance of who? Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh. And so after the U.S. moves out by 1975, Saigon falls. Saigon will no longer be Saigon when it's taken over. It becomes Ho Chi Minh City. So did the U.S. win? Here are our POWs coming home. And then this will eventually be created in remembrance of the Vietnam War, the Vietnam War Memorial. I'm sorry, we've done Vietnam.